So Paul is Vice President and General Manager for Australia and New Zealand Iron Mountain. And Paul talked to us about leadership, digital roadmap and AI adoption, transforming complexity into actionable steps to harness the potential of the data revolution.
Whoa.
Yeah, is it the right topic or?
Good enough, thank you. Thank you. Actually, guys, can you just go back to the holding slide for a moment, please? I don't know how many you've noticed, but just about all of these photos look like they were taken about 15 years ago and about 15 kilos ago. I think so. Thank you, guys. Let me ask you quickly, how many of you know the name Iron Mountain? Quick show of hands. Okay, that's interesting. How many of you don't know Iron Mountain? Okay, and who has a shoulder injury? Okay, this isn't going to help us very much. Iron Mountain, you probably know us in a couple of different spaces. Let me take just a moment to share a couple of things. About 32 million cartons of records sit in Iron Mountain warehouses around Australia and New Zealand. Now, are they data or records? Yes. Yeah, that's a great answer. The answer is yes. It determines by the value that you apply to that. Right? It's your thinking, it's valuable to you, your citizens, your clients in the corporate world. Yeah? So that context becomes a really interesting piece, and I love the way the guys up here were sort of handling and bouncing around the topic before. When does a particular piece of this asset that we have change its status? And when does it become something physical to something electronic? And does my care and attention to that asset change as its state changes? Yeah? And here we are all wrestling towards running down the car at 1,000,000 miles an hour towards AI opportunities. We're thinking about data transformation in all sorts of interactions with citizens, all sorts of interactions with organisations, each other, the corporate world, etc. And there's some real fundamental elements that we haven't necessarily captured strongly, and we still argue about it today, and probably will. Is it ever going to be sexy? I don't know. I'll give it a crack though. So, cartons is one thing. You probably know us, if you don't know us, from a records, storage and management perspective. The little blue bin next to the photocopier with the padlock on it, yeah? That's secure destruction process. And then the recycling that sits behind that, which you may not be aware of. We do exactly the same thing for IT assets. In fact, Iron Mountain worldwide is in the top 10 for e-waste organisations for the collection and appropriate redistribution of e-waste, either through destruction and recycling or through redeployment, remarketing those assets. So again, a little fact that maybe you don't know. Turning those physical assets into electronic assets, the extraction of the fields, the extraction of the data that sits inside that is also something that we do for many of the organisations here today. On top of that, the storage of those elements, and then into some of the classic IT elements that we see today that many of our speakers and many of our exhibitors will be talking to you about, which I'm not going to go into right now. We are also in the top 10 for data centre providers worldwide. We don't provide that in Australia. But what we do there is provide up to, in the top 10 for megawatts produced, deployed, and all of it 100% renewable. So it's kind of a bit of an overview of where we are, from an Iron Mountain point of view. What I wanted to do today was to try and get a little practical with you for just a moment. Outside of the hype, outside of all the noise of what's going on. And there are some elements of the work we do together and the work you do in your organisations, which is well mature, right? Well perceived, well understood. The problem that we face and what we observe in our workings with organisations like you is that it's not necessarily implemented very well down into the field, right, down into your people. So while we talk about the ability to classify metadata on records or data, etc., it's not necessarily always done. So I'm going to talk to a couple of little examples. I'm going to talk to a little model that we use, and we found it to be extremely helpful when we're working with you, with commercial customers, etc., around the industry. So this dream of being, data being dormant to digitally transformed. What does that actually mean? Well, it's relevant to the organisation that you're with and to the people that you're serving. A case that we love to talk about at Iron Mountain because it really does capture some really great elements of these types of outcomes. There's a case we actually built in the UK. We like to beat them at cricket. Don't think we've got a chance of beating them in the soccer or the football, but anyway, we like to use their story in particular in this case. And that's around the Courts and Tribunals service, but specifically around probate and wills. Now, from a personal experience recently, I've been through this process in our country, and it's tough. It's a hard thing to do, to work through that particular element in your life as you are sort of working through with your family, etc. What we were able to understand from the probate and wills services in the UK was just the incredible variety of data that was out there, 41 million identifiable assets. All different forms, from all different points of origin. Some born digitally, most not. Sometimes on very old artefacts. And they're not only used for the purposes of distributing assets through the probate process if someone passes away, but they're also used from a genealogical perspective, they're used for historical points of view, all sorts of demographical information. But how do you get all of that up into a system that can be used effectively? And the experience for users is absolutely critical. Why? Because in reality, we're talking about people dealing with an incredibly difficult time in their lives and don't really need the rigmarole. And of course, the expense that goes along with that. The outcome, 41 million assets made available, not always online, sometimes being able to be brought back through a scan-on-demand type process, scraping what we need to make it identifiable to the individual who is authorised. But ensuring that we're not maintaining those personally identifiable issues, personally identifiable information available as we go forward. The time taken through an incredibly stressful process was significantly reduced. In fact, not only was it reduced, but the outcome of the service was actually able to squeeze another 40% in terms of delivery and timeframes. The ability for more people to get access to the data that was important to them, as we spoke earlier from our presentation from the ABS. That cross-departmental information sharing has been critical, and we see that growing day by day. Created a revenue stream. So the opportunity where organisations are willing to pay for access to those assets also provided a great outcome. And then finally, there is a stated ambition, as we all know, to reach digital transformation through many different elements and different partitions through our organisations. So this fulfilled some of those assets, or some of that obligation for the government. So that's just a little story to tell, really, just to say what's potentially possible with an incredibly large number of assets, both digital and otherwise, getting them into a format that can be used in a digital way. And maybe that is a good example of digital transformation. Do you like it? What do you think? Sound okay? It's a nice little carrot, I think. When you think about what's possible, when we talk about what we can do in our organisations, there's a possibility there. But of course, as we know, with every carrot there's a stick. Or in this case, there's no stick. Right? Just an objective. Down the end there, what can I get to? And I know that each and every one of us are sitting around thinking about how we would do things better. Our day-to-day experiences, our interactions with different organisations as we live our lives personally. We can see opportunities to go forward. But as we know, without caution, we know that there's trouble. Without getting into or naming organisations, but we know, telco, we know financial services, we know health insurance. Just three marquee cases, in our recent times that we've seen, that we have seen significant breaches and significant public information getting out into the wrong hands. I call it the trifecta because I actually got struck by all three of them at the time, which wasn't so great. But you can see that the context of a breach is really difficult. Not just for the individual, not just for the reputation of the organisation, but sometimes for the reputation of an industry. It can become extremely critical as to how we do that. I think there are efficiencies around our organisations that we lose sight of also. So there are opportunities for us to increase the efficiencies, get more productivity, more returns for the effort that our employees actually put to the tasks. And of course, it can go the opposite direction if we have failure. And finally, financial penalties exist, just to continue that analogy of the stick being out there also. Everyone heard about data being the oil? You know, the wealth of information that's available to us and the wealth that we can see from that. And I know recently one of my colleagues said sometimes it just feels like the asbestos. You know, we thought it was going to be great, and then we ran into to these elements. I love the notion, particularly in an AI context. You think about what we feed up into the machine. Have you heard the term AI hallucination? Yeah, I think it's a wonderful approach or a wonderful thought. You know, that we can actually, in our haste to get to somewhere, find out that we're actually making really bad decisions a lot more quickly than we would have in the past. Yeah? Okay. I'm just noting the time. Who needs to go to lunch at 1 o'clock? Yeah, we all do. Okay, I'm going to get a bit of a wriggle on. So we think this little model is super helpful. Now, I'm not putting it up as an intellectual model. I'm not putting it up as a framework for us to run around. I just think it's a really interesting pictorial view of where we see organisations being successful and where we see gaps in the execution. And the first one is up here in discovery. Now, we've talked about all sorts of tools available to us to be able to go in and scrape digitally born data today. Yeah? Is that enough? Is that enough for us to really learn and understand what's happening? Well, I see a few shakes. I see a few nods. It depends on the domain. If you are diagnosing someone from a health context, is it enough just to have the digital born data available to you today? Of course not. Right? And where is the rest of that data? Yeah, somewhere. In our case, millions and millions of records sitting on shelves in warehouses, right, waiting to be physically delivered on a daily basis to clinics, or an emergency delivery if it's an emergency issue. Right? So many organisations we talk to. Now, when I say so many, I don't mean a few or a bunch or half. I mean just about everybody. Just about everybody doesn't know. Whoops. Is it going to go back one for me if I press the red button, guys? Yes, it is. Okay. I was looking for my pointer. Don't know what they've got. So much so that we've seen some amazing cases in our courts, particularly in the financial services sector, where through our Royal Commission processes we've seen that some organisations have landed themselves in incredibly hot water because they didn't know what they had. Now, the great thing about working with government is that you've got all of the framework, all of the legislation, you've got everything that you need to drive the decisions that you make about your data. Yeah? What we don't necessarily see, though, is that discovery process being executed extremely well. And uncovering what you have or don't have is going to be critical down the path into making key decisions. Infrastructure plans, records about health statistics, etc., that aren't necessarily sitting in digitally born data or have not been converted to digital data yet. The second one we talk about is this unification piece. Right. Again, if you are pulling together statistics, a colleague of mine, Matt, put your hand up, Matt, give him a wave, because the guys might see you in the piece later, loves to talk about the idea of, is putting a skate ramp in a community a good idea or a bad idea? What do you think? Good idea? Bad idea? Okay, so we've got a few bads in there. Why? Why is it a good idea? Community engagement, health, exercise, community coming together. Why is it a bad idea? Increased risks of injuries, truancy, bad eggs get together in one spot, right? Unification processes of data, really interesting. What we know today is that you can only really get to the stuff that's already now digital, right? And I forget who mentioned the comment up here earlier about funding, right? When we talk about money to go and do clever things going forward, what about the funding that helps you do these really basic things? Understanding what you've got and understanding how you pull that physical and digital information together to get a complete picture of the environment that you're working within. Over here on the governance side, again, when we talk to corporates, it's a vastly different conversation. You know, they look at the standards out there and say the great things about standards is that there's so many to choose from. Yeah? You guys don't get that luxury. So that's a good piece. But what I'm really concerned about is when you think about those standards for compliance and security and then drop over here to the maintenance piece. Now, I don't want to poll the audience, so I won't, but how much of your sentencing has been completed today across your records? We talk about it in terms of digital data pretty strongly, and we believe we're in reasonable shape. Although I would suggest once again that perhaps from this perspective we're not as strong as we feel we need to be. Yeah, but certainly from a physical point of view, when we get down into that understanding, putting the mirror in front of ourselves, going, are we really compliant? Are we really there? Often the answer is no. And then unlocking and automation. This is kind of the areas where all of us vendors like to get on board with you and talk about the great future that's out there for us all. Two quick examples. One really speedy one around automation. In Victoria, where I live, if you get caught speeding, it's about $596 and 3 demerit points for being 12 k's over the limit, as I've got some very recent experience talking to. That sounds like a little bit too much knowledge, all right? But if my car is registered to a corporation, the fine is $3,000. Right? Now, if you're a hire car company and you have multiple vehicles, every speeding fine is $3,000. So a simple, as the correspondence comes in, as the record comes in, scan, strip the appropriate fields, compare it to the rental data, get the information straight back out to the authorities to say that fine is not ours, it belongs to that person. And then the Vic Roads can go and do the appropriate things there. Now, so what? Simple, you get the idea, that's kind of easy to do, right? Cost about 30 grand to implement. Saves this particular company 2 full-time employees every year on that task. So when we talk about productivity from automation, it's not just about the big ticket items. It's about finding points of productivity in your organisation that can really make a change for you. The other piece is this conversation about unlocking, and there's hundreds of ideas. I love a little story again that Matt talks to around, you know, back in a few years back, there was some concerns about food being inappropriately handled through the chain from when it was sort of grown to when it was presented in supermarket shelves, and there was an E. coli problem in spinach. So just the ability to track the evolution of produce, you know, via a blockchain and then analyse some of those elements, actually found out that in real terms, strawberries are better to be picked in the morning than in the afternoon. Nothing to do with the spinach, nothing to do with E. coli, but just the unintended outcomes or consequences of the work that you do. And again, I would put that was quite a positive story, but let's just think about the number of organisations today that are uncovering things about themselves that they don't like to see. Yeah? And when they hold that mirror up in front of themselves, what does that outcome look like? And I would suggest to you that in many cases, these elements here are impacted by us not doing the work up here. Right? Not doing the hard work up there. So, with that in mind, and there's no water up here. I am so dry right now. I'm going to keep pushing forward. Did you like that? The little hint? Thank you. It wasn't bad. I really need a Carlton draft if that's okay. That can be edited out of the filming, right? Thank you for that. So I want to give you just a little bit of an idea. Well, let's think about something that if we pulled some things together, pulled some strings, what would that look like in the context of what I have been talking about today? Oh, thank you very much. I wish I was a ventriloquist, actually. How good would that be? Thank you. So there's a context I want to put to you, and it's around freedom of information. All right? It is an obligation. It's hard It's hard to do. It's got to be right. Now, our service around freedom of information services combines a bunch of work around making sure the right data is presented, physical or digital, making sure that it is redacted appropriately, making sure that structured and unstructured data as it relates to that particular case is brought together. And we use some intelligence for that. We use some engines for that to help us to do that work. But the second part of that that's really important is bringing the human into the loop. Because we would suggest that we are not all entirely confident about the results of AI. We're not all entirely confident, and we can bring examples forward day by day where we can see 60% accuracy or 80% accuracy or 30% accuracy. But in an environment where, 98, 99% accuracy is the absolute minimum, we think that there's a case for doing both. And having the human in the loop is a significant opportunity to provide that level of judgment, the appropriate level of training. And what we also believe is over time, as our confidence builds, as we get better at the stuff I talked about earlier, the identification, unification, getting our policy and governance right, etc., maintaining those outcomes, that we can bring back the human from the loop and start to change the model. But for today, in today's practical purposes, that outcome's really important. And just to give you an example of that, the freedom of information use case that we have says there is an opportunity. There's an opportunity for you today. Now, our guys are out in the stand there. In fact, Chris, I'll get you to pop your hand up. Chris, our local Canberra leader. Rob, digital specialist. Matt is our country sales leader. So the guys are going to be over in the showroom a little bit later. So if you'd like to talk about that with us, feel free to. But higher volumes of requests, significant reductions in processing time, being able to bring a consistent interpretation to the outcomes and ensuring that the error rate goes down significantly, that's really the key. And of course, redaction of information as required and the appropriate stapling or stitching together of the data to get it into a presentable case that can be in a defensible position. So just a little idea about how we might bring some of those concepts together and wrap it round in that context of the human in the loop. There's all sorts of areas of that comes into play. You think about the hole that Decipher exiting the mailroom industry, for example, here in Australia, and the hole that we're filling at Iron Mountain to resolve that problem. Again, humans in the loop, lifting the levels of technology and innovation as we go, but making sure that the outcome is what our focus is, not selling you a product. All right, and then finally, with the dirty subject of money. I serve on a board in disability sports, and our CFO, he always prefaces the conversation around finance with, and now to the dirty subject of money. Okay, so I wanted to put this in front of you just to give you a context about some of the, we like to call it financial plumbing, that we're able to do through the Iron Mountain organisation to smooth the line. Now, I appreciate that for many of you, that that black line is actually a single year, budget to budget. So that can be a problem. But I would also suggest to you that if you are able to see those projects over the longer term with value, we can actually take out some of those pretty significant initial costs and look to flatten those lines over the budgetary period to give you that outcome. And that conversation works very, very well in all sorts of different project type work, our consulting type services linked to that, and stitching together the solution that isn't just sitting in a box waiting to be picked off a shelf, but actually finding the holes that we can provide, or that we can provide filler for. That could be scanning as a service. It could be records and information management as a service. But those concepts and topics are available to talk about. Really just a question in that budgetary cycle. I appreciate that it's not always the easiest thing to do, but it's appropriate to put it up to let you know. And then so like last couple of things, the did you knows, IRAP's assessed where our reconciliation action plan is being finalised. Our gender pay gap parity, we are on top of that and working towards those outcomes. We've implemented our global human rights policy. We're driving for 100% renewables. We actually believe in doing the right thing, not just doing the thing to make some money for our shareholders. We think our stakeholders are broader than just the people who own shares in Iron Mountain, our employees, our customers. Our employees, the people who work in our warehouses, who stack boxes on shelves and drive forklifts every day. You know, they're often not seen in our industry, but all of those things we find are super important to us as we are out serving the community. And as I said earlier, Matt, Chris, Rob, myself, we're going to be floating around out in the exhibition area, so we'd love to come up and have a chat. If you've got a few ideas or something you think we need to be picking up on, happy to get amongst it and chat. And I've got time for questions, but I'd love to take some questions outside, given that it's time to have a munch.
Okay, we'll take one question. Actually, there is one thing I want to add. I used to look after records management and had to work with Iron Mountain, thinking about digitization. We don't have to digitize everything because we can be very strategic if we have a limited budget, right? We can pretty much figure out what needs to be given to National Archives. And National Archives only will accept now records in digital form. So the first step of kind of prioritization could be just look at this. And I have to say, it's much easier for Iron Mountain to digitize it than for you to hire someone and find the right scanner and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I thought, look, just OH&S, just picking up a box full of paper, back injury, all that sort of stuff. There's so many factors in that. But you reminded me of something that the boys would absolutely kill me if I didn't mention. We're running this process at the moment, which we call smart sort. It's not very smart, to be honest. Right? It's just sorting. But what we're uncovering is that what many organisations are spending in terms of data that's locked away that you can't get access to, right? The ability to digitise what's important, destroy what's not, and stick the rest back on a shelf for eternal storage, it's a really simple thing to do. It's not super expensive. Right? But we're seeing organisations are reducing their overheads by up to 80%, right, in terms of that storage conversation. And as you've said already, once the box is ready to be scanned, once the documents are ready to go, it's a hell of a lot easier for us to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, one question, going once.
Going twice.
Going twice. All right.
Bingo. Thank you, everybody. Great to see you.
Yeah, thank you.